Full disclosure, at one time or another, CNN and other networks have turned to Shoebat for his perspective on the war on terror, an apparent look from the inside. But keeping him honest tonight, we're discovering that Walid Shoebat's story just doesn't seem to add up. Here's CNN's Drew Griffin of CNN's Special Investigations Unit.
I think we are at war with Islamic fundamentalism and Islamism, which stems from Islam. No historian can deny that Islamists basically invaded Christendom.
Walid Shoebat's message is the epitome of good versus evil. He has an advertised pedigree that makes him an expert. Islamic terrorist turned ultra-conservative Christian. A U.S. citizen because his mother is American, he is a darling on the terror circuit, the church and university circuits, and yes, he believes the war on terror is a holy war. He portrays himself as a man converted and on a mission. Once a Jew-hating, bomb-throwing terrorist, now a devout Christian convert warning the world, Islam is out to destroy you.
فَإِذَا لَقَيْتُمِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبُ الرِّقَابِ. That's how you recite the Quran. I know the Quran inside out. English. And if you meet the unbelievers, then smite off their necks. But what part of smite off their necks? The Americans don't understand.
His message before a largely positive crowd of cops and emergency responders at this South Dakota Homeland Security Conference: trust no Muslim, especially those who organize.
Know your enemy. Know your enemy. All Islamist organizations in America should be the number one enemy. All of them, the Islamist organizations. The Islamic Society of North America should be focused on. You got that on camera? Yes, please.
He is being paid $5,000 plus expenses to speak here with your tax dollars. He was also given a Rapid City police guard during his time in the city. A nice day's work. And judging by his website, where he highlights more than 36 speaking engagements, Shoebat gets a lot of work. Being a terrorism expert has become a cottage industry since 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security has spent nearly $40 million on counterterrorism training just since 2006. DHS doesn't keep records on how much is spent just on speakers. But some of the so-called experts who go around the country teaching, and in some cases preaching, about terrorism and the dangers of Islam are not quite what they seem. People, it turns out, like Walid Shoebat.
The first thing I want to ask you is, what was the purpose of your talk this morning to these cops and emergency responders here in South Dakota?
Well, being an ex-terrorist myself is to understand the mindset of the terrorist, number one.
An ex-terrorist. It's Walid Shoebat's claim to fame. A terrorist, a PLO member, who bombed a branch of an Israeli bank in Bethlehem Square, throwing a firebomb on the bank's roof. The problem with the story, with a lot of Shoebat's stories, there's no evidence for them. And despite CNN's many requests, neither Shoebat nor his business partner have provided us with any.
Bombings in Bethlehem Square, you specifically said you threw...
The bank was in the Bethlehem Square.
You threw explosives.
Yes, I did.
On top of that bank.
Yes, I did.
No record.
CNN's Jerusalem Bureau went to great lengths trying to verify Shoebat's story, finding the general location where the branch of Bank Leumi once stood, but not finding anyone who could remember a bombing. We contacted the bank headquarters in Tel Aviv, asking officials to search records. No records found. And Israeli police found no record anyone ever threw a bomb at the branch of the bank.
Why would the bank not have a record? Why would the Israeli police not have a record?
Why would the Israeli police not have a record? I don't know. I don't know where you check, what dates, all these things.
There's another part of his story that doesn't check out. Shoebat says he was arrested and spent 2 weeks in an Israeli prison.
There's no record of you being in prison. I think there'd be at least an arrest record. They held you for 2 weeks. Wouldn't the United States know you were in prison if you were a U.S. citizen?
Well, how about me and you go to the Muscovia prison and extract the records? The records are there.
Okay.
Would you be willing to do so?
We did, and the Israeli detention center could find no record of detaining anyone with the name Walid Shoebat.
Yeah. You obviously can see why people are critical of your claims, there's a whole lot of
No, I don't
gaps in
see,
your
obviously.
story.
There's no gaps at all in
We
my
don't
story.
have a bank bombing.
And we don't have a terrorist, because it turns out Walid Shoebat, even on his own admission, was never charged.
I was in prison for a few weeks.
What, was there a charge?
No, I was a U.S. citizen, remember? I was born by an American mother. The other conspirators in the act ended up in jail. I ended up being released.
There's another problem: his family. In the neighborhood where Walid Shoebat grew up, relatives say he was just a regular kid. And Daoud Shoebat, who says he is Walid's fourth cousin, goes even further.
There were only two banks in Bethlehem district, and they are Bank Leumi and Discount Bank. They were on Nativity Square, and Walid never had any connection with those two banks, not a close or a distant connection. I tell you, this is out of experience. I am one of the people who are considered a responsible man in the area of Bethlehem or Bet Sahur. I have never heard anything about Walid being a mujahid or a terrorist. He claims this for his own personal reasons.
So Drew, he's saying he claimed this for his own personal reasons. What personal reasons?
Well, there's a big personal reason here. It's called money. You know, Anderson, enough to tell you, classic investigative reporting, you follow the money. Like his background, how Walid Shoebat is now making that money is about as mysterious as his past.
Yeah. The Walid Shoebat Foundation, is that a charity?
Walid Shoebat Foundation is part of the FFMU.
And what does the FFMU do?
Basically, we're in the information, and we do speaking, and we do also helping Christians that are being persecuted in countries like Pakistan. And we help Christians who are suffering all throughout the Middle East.
And how do you do that?
None of your business.
None of your business. That's interesting. Our investigation continues tomorrow night, right? Tell us, what are we going to see tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow, how he makes a business out of his expertise, how these donations to his cause end up with a so-called foundation owned by his business partner, and also the bigger question, Anderson, why are our taxpayers going to pay this guy? He can say whatever he wants, but where are the people vetting these so-called terrorism experts that are suddenly making a lot of money in this country?
There's a guy named Kamal Saleem, and he gives speeches to right-wing groups and government groups, etc., claiming that he is an ex-terrorist. But thank God he's found the way, he's found the light, and he goes and speaks to these groups, like the Values Voter Summit that just happened. He spoke there. Here, let me give you a sample of what he said. Here, let's go to clip one.
My grandfather came from the Ottoman Empire when it fell in 1924 as a general. He earned his scars by the sword of Islam. And when he had my mom, I was born to a Muslim mother who is zealot. I was trained, and she told me from my childhood, my son, you will die for the sake of Allah. And when you kill Jews and Christians, Allah will celebrate your glory and your hands will light up before the throne of Allah. I was a young lad. I dreamt about killing Jews and Christians. This is my dream as a child.
That is a powerful story. And it got the crowd revved up. They were, look at this ex-terrorist. You see that? We knew it. We knew all these Muslims were trained at birth to kill Christians and Jews. In fact, he also said, I came to destroy this country as a terrorist. Funny that the FBI hasn't talked to him. But anyway, he's had speaking engagements in not just the Values Voter Summit, but at the state capitals throughout the country, at the Air Force Academy, and at colleges and churches all across the country. And he has an amazing tale to tell. Do you know that he says he's worked for Yasser Arafat, the PLO, Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan? And by the way, as you're about to see here in clip number 2, he was also indoctrinated by the Muslim Brotherhood.
I was recruited in the mosque at young age, as many children start attending the mosque in a neighborhood, by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood came to history in 1928. I was indoctrinated by them in the mosque. That was my college study. We were taught how to infiltrate civilization and become part of nations and change the nations from inside. How to marry your daughters and obtain the citizenship. How to join your military and become member of your military so we can get the citizenship. How to become chaplain and spy on this nation and give it to our brotherhood. And how to become part of this world and come across the borders to infiltrate your very civilization today. This is in a nutshell.
So Kansas City Star sees this, and they're like, wait, let me get this right. Muslim Brotherhood, Arafat, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, is there anybody you didn't mention? And they called him, quote, the Forrest Gump of the Middle East. So now this guy continues with his amazing tales. In fact, he's got one that involves curious sounds and a sad story about a young man that got killed and how proud his mom was that he was killed. Because, you know, it's all Muslims. It's in their culture. That's the story he's really trying to bring to these right-wing voters. Watch.
My first master was Yasser Arafat. My first mission was very, very good. You see, the Jews didn't think that children can do such a thing. We took advantage of them. The second journey, I was 8, I was a recruiter. I recruited my next door neighbor, Muhammad. And I told his mom, I'll bring him back home alive. I made a promise. But that day they were waiting for us. This is when the blood of children and blood of lamb was mixed together as we're trying to rendezvous with the shepherd so they can put these belts on the belly of the sheep and take them inside Israel to give them to Fidaiyin, which is the martyrs. That day, they shot us with everything. Muhammad took shrapnel through his esophagus and he fell down to the ground. I carried him and I'm crying, how I'm going to tell his mom? And I was crying, Mama. That day, Muhammad went a different place. You see, when his mom talked to me, she said, where is Muhammad? You promised he'll be back. I said, he is with Allah. He's celebrating in the host of heaven. Now he can go to paradise without judgment because he became a forgiven like a Messiah to you. And I said, now he's being wed by Allah with 72 versions, and with every version he has 72 other versions. Muhammad is in good place, Fatima. She put her hand to her lips and shouted with a shout of wedding feast. She celebrated her son wedding into the heavens.
This guy is a colorful character, man. And he's giving them the show that they want. Oh, yeah, Muslims with their weird little calls and stuff. And yeah, they were so ecstatic when their kid died. By the way, this guy also sounds like Father Sarducci from Saturday Night Live. And then you need 2 or 3 miracles. And I tell her, your son has a 72 virgins. But why would a mom care about that? Okay, so if you notice, he said in his second mission he was 8 years old. According to his accounts, in his first mission when he was running the guns on the sheeps, I'm not kidding, that's what he says, he was 7 years old. Who would be so colossally stupid as to believe this? Well, of course, not the authorities. In 2007, for example, in Chino Hills, California, he said that Muslim agents had broken into his Holiday Inn and ransacked the place. Oh, the Muslim Brotherhood's on his tail. When cops were asked about it, quote, local law enforcement, however, has no record of any such incident. Yeah. Fail. And then in 2007, again, he's speaking at Michigan's Calvin College. Another professor, Doug Howard, professor of Middle Eastern history, notices that he's saying really weird things. And in the middle of his speech, he says that he was a descendant of, quote, the Grand Wazir of Islam. Here's the only problem. There is no such thing. That's an awesome fail. He just made it up. He's like, it sounds kind of like wizard, you know? And other things. Oh, la 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 la. I, the Grand Wazir of Islam. And Doug Howard's like, wait a minute, there's no such thing. What the hell's going on here? This guy is unreal. So, in fact, literally, it turns out his real name is Kodor Shami. That collab name, he just made it up. It's Kodor Shami. And in fact, who did he work for 10 years before he came out as an ex-terrorist? Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network and James Dobson's Focus on the Family. Gee, I wonder where he got all these ideas. Can't quite tell. Come on, Kamal. Even though that's not actually his name. All right. Now, he says that he speaks at the FBI all the time, and the FBI is communicating because people say, hey, wait a minute, my God, if you were this mastermind terrorist, why isn't the FBI talking to you? Well, he said, oh, yeah, all the time. So they asked FBI spokesperson Kathleen Wright. She said, quote, no information that Kamal Saleem has spoken at an FBI-sponsored event cannot say definitively whether the Bureau had ever been in contact with him. And I love this line by Dawood Wali. He's the, one of the guys from the Council on American Islamic Relations. Obviously, they realized that this guy's a scam artist. He said, quote, "The FBI or the Department of Homeland Security don't let people who are terrorists into the country and not detain them just because they claim they got the Holy Ghost."